The Case of the Missing Diamond. Mr. Clark was a well-known detective in the small town of Hillview. He was famous for his keen sense of observation and his ability to solve even the trickiest cases. One sunny morning, Mrs. Brown, a wealthy widow, rushed into Mr. Clark's office, visibly upset. She held her hands to her chest, gasping, "Mr. Clark, my precious diamond necklace is missing. You have to help me." Mr. Clark took a moment to calm her down and asked, "When did you last see your necklace, Mrs. Brown?" She replied, "I wore it to a party last night at the Hillview Club. When I came home, I took it off and placed it on my dressing table. But this morning, it was gone." Mr. Clark nodded thoughtfully and said, "Let's go back to the club. We need to retrace your steps." At the club, Mr. Clark carefully inspected the room where the party had taken place. He was sharp and observant, and soon he noticed a shiny piece of thread on the floor near the entrance. He picked it up and examined it closely. It looked like it came from fancy clothing, maybe from a costume or a uniform. This tiny clue led him to wonder about the people Mrs. Brown might have met at the party. "Mrs. Brown," he asked, "did you speak to anyone unusual last night?" She thought for a moment and then replied, "Now that you mention it, yes. A waiter was unusually friendly. He offered me drinks a few times and even stayed to chat, which I found a bit odd." Mr. Clark's curiosity piqued. "What did this waiter look like?" he asked. Mrs. Brown described him, saying he was tall, had curly hair, and a distinct scar on his cheek. Mr. Clark thanked her and went straight to the manager of the catering company. After a few questions, he discovered that no waiter with a scar or curly hair worked at the party last night. It was a major clue. The waiter was likely an imposter who had sneaked in. With this information, Mr. Clark decided to investigate further. He found out that a man matching that description had been seen around town recently. Using his connections, Mr. Clark tracked down the man and found him hiding in a small apartment nearby. When Mr. Clark confronted him, the man initially denied any involvement. But when Mr. Clark searched his coat, he found Mrs. Brown's diamond necklace hidden in one of the pockets. The man, realizing he was caught, confessed to everything. He had heard about the party and planned to pose as a waiter to get close to Mrs. Brown, hoping to steal the necklace when no one was watching. Mr. Clark returned the diamond necklace to Mrs. Brown, who was overjoyed. "Thank you, Mr. Clark. I don't know what I would have done without you." Mr. Clark smiled modestly and replied, "Just doing my job, Mrs. Brown. Remember, in mysteries, it's the little details that often hold the key." And with that, he tipped his hat and left, ready to solve his next case.